Hi everyone, it's Lindsay. Welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be using this SVG file to make a card. This is going to be up on my blog for free. I put it into my Cricut and I cut it at 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. So this is going to completely fill a card front. If you want to add a little bit of a mat behind it, you can just size it down to 4 by 5 1/4 inches, or you can go smaller and add a couple mats behind it. I'm leaving mine at 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, so it does completely go from edge to edge on this A2 side folding card. Now I also went ahead and cut a piece of watercolor cardstock. This is slightly smaller, so this is about 4 inches by 5 1/4. That is just going to give me plenty of wiggle room when I go to line this up, but this is what I'm going to be working on right now. So I have some color burst. These are watercolor powders. Any watercolor powder is going to do. You could also use regular watercolors. I have some that I made here that are handmade. I'll have a video coming up on how to do those. I'm going to choose a few of those just to add some sparkle. You can also use your inks, your watercolor inks, for some really vibrant colors. It's completely up to you. I just kind of like the color bursts because they're really bright, they're really vibrant. All watercolor powders are going to be like that though. I'm using fuchsia and chartreuse. I'm starting out with the chartreuse and I am starting off on dry paper. I went ahead and taped this down to a clipboard just so I can move it around, kind of set it off to the side while it's drying. I've also taped it and given myself a little bit of an edge. That's just going to keep it nice and flat while I work with a lot of water. It's going to help it dry flat as well. The painter's tape that I am using is a low-tack painter's tape. You can buy it at your local hardware store. You can also buy it on Amazon. I will leave all the supplies I am using linked down below in the description box. So you can see I just sprinkled some powder onto my watercolor paper. This is a heavy-duty watercolor paper. You want it a little bit thicker because you're using quite a bit of water with these. Then I'm going to spritz the powder. It can get a little messy. You don't need a ton of powder. A little bit goes a long way with this. So I'm just going to spray that down and kind of assess and see where I'm at. If I feel like I need some more color in a certain spot, I will still continue to sprinkle down the powder. The great thing about the powder, you can use it on wet or you can use it on dry. You can sprinkle it down while the paper's dry, then spritz it, or you can go in after it's wet and sprinkle more powder down and it will just kind of burst across the paper. Now with some of the watercolor powders like the chartreuse, you not only have your green granules, but you also have some teal in there. So your colors are completely separated, which gives a really nice effect. So you're not just getting it one color, you can get 2, 3, sometimes even 4. Now I'm also going to add in a little bit of sparkle. So I have this handmade watercolor. You can buy these on Etsy by many different sellers. You can also make them yourself. It's really not hard at all. I'll show you how to do that in another video. But if you do not want to make them yourself or you don't want to buy them from Etsy, another option is to just get a sparkle spray. You won't have as much control, but you're going to get a similar effect and you're going to get just as much sparkle. Now I'm going to continue to put down this sparkle and just wherever I want to. I'm just kind of going into more of the fuchsia color and really putting that down. I'll also come in and flick some later just by adding more water, really loading up my brush and just flicking it down onto the paper. I also, off to the right hand side, have some of those negative spaces from my card front file that I cut. I keep all of those little odds and ends because I will be using that on my card design. I added some silver to them. I didn't end up using those, but I will show you what I did do in just a moment. Now I'm just going to go ahead and flick some of that watercolor down. It's going to kind of push back the other watercolor areas and just give a nice little silver color in there, not just the sparkle, but the silver color as well. Now while this is wet, it's going to look a little bit like a hot mess, but I promise once it dries, it kind of all comes together. So it looks not that great right now, But set it off to the side, let it air dry, and here's how it looks once it dries. The colors do mute just a little bit, but you really get some separation of the colors. The silver really starts to come out, and it doesn't look so muddled. Once it's dry, or right about where it's almost dry but maybe still a little damp, is a great time to pull off your painter's tape. To get it off cleanly, just pull it straight back on itself, and then you should be left with this beautiful background. You can really see the silver come out now that it's dry, and because I had it taped down, it dries nice and flat. Now, because this is so bright and colorful, it kind of seems like a lot, but once you put on that top overlay of the die cut or the SVG file, it really tones it down a little bit, breaks up those colors and separates it, and it's a really nice background for any one of your full cover plate dies. This technique is. Now, what you want to do is just go ahead and glue that down to your card front. Like I said, cut this down a little bit smaller, so I didn't have to worry about placement as much. Then I went ahead and added some foam tape onto that cut file that I cut out with my Cricut in the beginning, and I'm going to add this on to top of my card front. I just want to line this up, push it down, and it's good to go. I like to add the foam tape on top. It gives a little bit of separation from the background, and it also just adds a little bit of visual interest. Now for my sentiment, I'm going to be using this stamp set from Avery Elle. I don't know if it is available still. If it is, I'll link it below. If not, I'll find something similar and link it. You can always just type out your sentiments, print them off, and cut them. What I'm doing is stamping my sentiment with VersaFine Clair and Nocturne. This is one of my favorite black inks, and I'll stamp that just on a strip of white cardstock. Now this is quite long. I'm going to butt it up to the left side, and that's because I'm going to make this into a banner. But whenever I do something like this, I like to make it extra long, and then I'll cut it down when I know how long exactly it needs to be. Now I am going to also back this with a little bit of black cardstock, and I'm going to make that a little bit longer. So I've just scooched it down, then I'll trim the black exactly like I'm trimming the white. But once I butt them up on the left side together, the black will be a little bit longer, so it just stands out, kind of backs it, gives it a little bit more interest, and separates that white sentiment strip visually from the white background. I'll also add foam tape. That's going to help pop it up and give a little bit of shadow, which again just helps it separate from that stark white background and give the sentiment a little bit more pop. Now you could leave this card as is and it would be good to go, but it was still just missing a little bit of something. So what I decided to do was take some of those leftover cutouts from the front. I always keep those, and I am just putting some black Nocturne ink on them. Same ink that I used on my sentiment, but I'm covering those hearts in that. That's going to again help them pop out from the white background. I'll add some foam tape to the back and just pop those up around the card. It's going to give a little bit more interest, but it's also going to blend with the card because the cutouts come from the card front itself, so it'll all go together. I also did some in silver. I wasn't loving the way those looked though, so I went ahead and just chose to go with just the black, and I'm adding 3 of those. So anytime I'm adding something to a card front, whether it be like jewels, pearls, drops of any kind, I like to go with an odd number. So in this case, these are quite large, so I'm just going to use 3 and use them to kind of highlight that sentiment a little bit and dress up the front of the card. I also like to put them in a bit of a triangle, so you'll see in the placement you can kind of pick out the triangle that I went with here. Now, one thing when you are working on a stark white background like I am here, sometimes you can get ink places you don't want it. I'm working with some really dark black ink. I'm also working with bright watercolors. So if that ever happens to you, one thing you can do is use a sanding eraser. These are cheap, but they are kind of irreplaceable in your stash. They lightly sand off just the very top layer. You're not going to see any sanding marks like you would with like a nail file or a sanding block. It's a very fine grit, but it's just enough to take off any smudges. I also got some on the back, so I just went ahead and got those away with the sanding eraser as well. And finally, I'm going to add some black enamel accents. You could use Nouveau drops, you could use black sequins, black jewels, whatever you want. I just happen to have enamel accents. I really like the way they look, so I just scattered a few of those across the front of the card as well. I kind of placed them around the hearts that I had already placed down, so again, just adds a little bit more interest. And I'm going with that black to kind of tie it all together. And that is the finished card. Be sure to head over to my blog and grab your free cut file. Also, if you're interested in any of the supplies I used today, you can find them listed in the description box below with links. That is going to do it for me today. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Happy crafting, everyone!